In the world of chess, there's lots of games that are extremely fun. However, not all of them are followed by standards. There's some good games that have different variants. One of them is Crazy House. The only difference between Crazy House and others is, for example, when you take, you get to use that piece in the game. Let me show you. When they take, you can use any pawn and place it any square, like for example, pawn, except for the 8th rank. Black also has a pawn and can use it anytime, anywhere. Except if you're white, you cannot place it on the 1st rank or the 8th rank, and for black as well. Now, now that you know the rules, I'll show you one cool game I found online. So, black begins with French defense, and unlike this, a trade is not that great. So c5 is played, bishop to e2, and knight to f6, determined to attack the pawn. Because now if you play d4, the pawn can take, which is not great. Knight c3 is moved, supporting the pawn. a6 is also played, and now pawn to e5, because now the knight does not want to go there, and this is not a great square. So knight goes to g4. h3 is played, kicking out the knight. The knight goes to take on f2, but since there's no bishop, the king can directly take. Now white has a knight to use and black has a pawn to use. Now he places the pawn at d4. Like I said, you can play the pawn on any square, and the knight moves to e4. d5 is played, determined to kick them out. And there's something called en passant, which means you can take, and it happens in the game. Bishop takes d6. Now look at these carefully. Knight takes d6, and now this is white. So white is up, it has these pieces, while black has these pieces. So the bishop is moved here because the knight is defending the bishop. The queen takes. Now white is completely up a queen, and now black castles. The rook moves to f3 so that the king can go and stealth and manually make a castle. The bishop moves to, and the knight moves back, covering the king. The king is super safe. The knight moves here, determined to attack the rook, and while being supported by the bishop. So d3 is played, and our rook is given to black. Now the pawn is repeatedly attacking the king, but the knight makes sure that nothing is like ruining anything because all of these are covered. Next comes pawn to e5. This is not a great move because it's blocking the bishop, meaning that the king is even more safe. Now a trade occurs. Now white has 3 pawns, 1 knight, and a queen, so they're slightly winning. And if you take a look at the evaluation bar, a positive evaluation bar shows that if the number is positive, that means they're winning. Now the knight is placed determined to trade and destroy the center, but he plays pawn to h6, determined to destroy their file first, because they have a queen and they can cause lots of trouble. So the rook is here to block and cause a pin on the king. Next goes pawn takes, and now the pawn continues causing trouble. And look at the black's defense; it is not great at all. It has lots of black squares everywhere. And now the pawn continues rupture, but rather than moving, the pawn take goes there, and the king takes h2 and check. But in real games, you actually have to lose the knight. But in Crazy House, you can play pawn to block the piece as well. A trade occurs. Now the irregular thing is that if pawn takes, this is not going to be great because now they can promote and do all the bad stuff. So the pawn takes and the pawn blocks it. The bishop takes the pawn because it's extremely crucial, because if they take and promotes, it's extremely troublesome because they have a rook and a queen. So a trade occurs, and this is the final result. The knight continues attacking, and the pawn tries to stop it. But the queen continues moving, and the king is completely safe despite all these pawns. Because now they're out of pawns, and only a knight can do something like a fork, but it's not possible. The king is forced to move to the corner. And another good possible move is to move here to bishop to cause a pin, but it's still fine because eventually after knight, the queen moves here and the knight moves to e8. Try to stop and save the rook, but queen takes h4 and it's completely over, and as black resigned